He used to laugh when I said I'd make something of myself. Those were the first words that came to mind the day I saw his name flash on my phone again, after 3 years of silence. My ex-boyfriend, Daniel. The man who once told me dreams were for people who didn't have bills to pay. I stared at that screen for a long time, thumb hovering, heart steady but heavy. Fame changes many things, but the weight of an old heartbreak still presses in the same place. When I didn't answer, he texted. "I'm so proud of you. Always knew you'd make it." Funny. He always knew. Back then, he said no one would ever care about my art. Before the world knew my name, I was just a woman painting in the corner of a cramped apartment, with peeling yellow walls and a flickering kitchen bulb that hummed like a tired fly. I used to mix colors in old coffee mugs because I couldn't afford real palettes. Daniel would come home from work smelling like gasoline and cheap aftershave, tossing his keys on the counter, looking at me with that half-smile that could turn cruel in seconds. "You're still doing that?" he'd ask, glancing at my canvas. "I'm trying to finish this piece before." He'd interrupt. "You could try finishing your resume instead." He wasn't a bad man. Just small-minded. The kind of man who measured worth by paychecks and approval. We'd been together 4 years, long enough for me to believe we were building something together. Long enough to confuse criticism with care. He'd hold me at night and talk about the future, about our place, our plans, our life. But somehow, my dreams were never part of that picture. I remember once, I painted a portrait of a woman walking through fire, her face calm, her hands open. I showed it to him like a child showing her first report card. He squinted. "It's interesting. But why do you always paint sad women? It's depressing." I told him, because that's what truth looks like sometimes. He laughed. "No one wants truth, babe. They want something pretty." That night, I cried quietly into my pillow, the smell of turpentine still on my hands. When things started falling apart, it wasn't sudden. It was slow, like erosion. Little pieces of me chipped away every time he rolled his eyes or made a joke about my little hobby. He'd say things like, "You can't live off paint, Maya. You're wasting your best years chasing some fantasy. You think you're special, but the world doesn't care." And for a while, I believed him. I started shrinking myself to fit his comfort, taking part-time jobs, skipping exhibitions because we couldn't afford the gas, and slowly, my dreams turned into quiet sketches in the margins of grocery lists. Then one day, he didn't come home. Not that night. Not the next. When I called, he finally answered, sounding half-drunk. "I need space," he said. "Space for what?" I asked, voice trembling. "For someone who believes in me." That someone, I found out later, was Lisa, a girl he met at the auto shop, always laughing, always agreeable, with perfectly manicured nails that had never known paint or dirt. He left without much explanation, just took his things and left me standing in the doorway holding his old denim jacket. I remember that smell, oil, cigarettes, and the faint scent of the cologne I once loved. It took months before that smell faded from the walls. For a long time after he left, I lived in silence. Not the peaceful kind, the heavy kind that hums between loneliness and anger. Bills piled up. My landlord threatened eviction twice. My mother told me to come home, but I refused. I wanted to stand on my own, even if it meant standing in ashes. Then one night, I sat staring at my old sketchbook. My hand shook, but I opened it anyway. Page after page of half-finished dreams. I thought about all the times Daniel said I'd never make it, and something inside me snapped. Not in anger, but in resolve. That week, I sold my old TV and used the money to buy new paints. I painted from morning till dawn, sometimes forgetting to eat. I poured everything, heartbreak, humiliation, survival, into those canvases. Women breaking chains. Women walking alone. Women looking straight into the fire. I didn't plan to show them. I painted for air, because breathing hurt less when I created something from the pain. Then one day, a local gallery owner saw my work on a friend's social media post. She asked if she could showcase 3 of my paintings for a small exhibit. I said yes, though I had no money for frames or transport. I carried them myself, wrapped in bedsheets. I remember standing in that room the night of the opening, heart pounding, wearing a borrowed dress. People walked by my paintings, pausing, whispering, taking pictures. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. A week later, one of the paintings sold. Then another. By the end of that year, my name started appearing in local newspapers. Then art blogs. Then, somehow, everywhere. I began getting calls from galleries, interviews, sponsorships. My following grew. My art, my pain, had found its place in the world. And just when the noise of success started to feel overwhelming, when my life finally felt full again, he called. Daniel. The man who left me for being too unrealistic. The man who said dreams don't pay bills. The man who once called my paintings sad. He messaged again the next day. I saw your interview. You look amazing. I always knew you had it in you. I should have ignored it. I wanted to. But curiosity is a quiet devil. So I replied. Thank you, Daniel. How have you been? And that's when it began, the unraveling of everything I thought I'd left behind. His first few messages were polite, even cautious. The kind you send to test the water before diving in. Just wanted to say I'm proud of you. I've been keeping up with your work. You're everywhere now. You deserve all this. I always told you that. That last one made me pause. He always told me that? No, he didn't. He told me the opposite, over and over, until I believed him. But instead of correcting him, I just typed. Thanks. It's been a long road. He replied instantly, like he'd been waiting for my message all day. I know. I was stupid back then. I didn't see what you were trying to do. There it was, the first breadcrumb. Regret. Nostalgia. Maybe guilt. We started talking occasionally. Small things at first. He'd ask about my art, my travels. He'd comment on my interviews or Instagram posts, sometimes leaving old inside jokes that only we would understand. It felt strange. Like opening an old wound that had healed on the surface but was still tender underneath. He said he'd moved back to the city after a bad breakup, with her, of course. Lisa. Apparently, she'd never really understood him. I wanted to laugh at the irony, but I didn't. I just listened, quietly. Because part of me, a small, foolish part, still wanted to understand why. One evening, he called. His voice was softer than I remembered, slower. You sound different, he said. I am different, I replied. He chuckled. Yeah, you sound successful. There was something behind his tone, admiration mixed with something darker. Maybe envy. Maybe hunger. He asked if we could meet just to catch up. I hesitated. Every instinct told me no, but curiosity won again. We agreed to meet at a cafe downtown, one of those trendy places with art on the walls and overpriced coffee. When I walked in, he was already there, wearing a crisp shirt, trying too hard. He stood up quickly when he saw me. Maya, he said, smiling, arms open. I let him hug me, but it felt like hugging a memory, cold around the edges. He looked older, more tired. A few gray hairs, some weight around the jawline. But his eyes, those deep brown eyes that once made me believe every lie, hadn't changed. We sat. He talked. Mostly about himself, his job, his regrets, his mistakes. I think about you a lot, he said. About how wrong I was. I stirred my coffee, watching the foam circle the spoon. About what? He sighed, staring at the table. About not supporting you. About walking away when I should have stayed. I was scared. You had this fire, and I didn't know how to handle it. That was the first honest thing he'd said all night. We talked for nearly an hour. When I got up to leave, he asked if we could see each other again. I told him I'd think about it. As I walked home, the city lights blurred through my window. Part of me wanted to believe him, to believe people can change. But another part whispered, be careful. The same snake can shed its skin and still bite. Over the next few weeks, he kept showing up, at my exhibits, at events, even once outside my building, by coincidence. He brought flowers once, said he was proud of me again, said I inspired him. It was almost convincing. But I started noticing little things, small cracks in his charm. He'd ask too many questions about my success. How much did that painting sell for? Who helps you manage your social media? Do you really handle all your contracts yourself? The questions didn't sound curious, they sounded calculating. Then, one night, I got a message from an old friend, Layla, who used to work at the same auto shop as Daniel years ago. Hey, random question, she wrote. Did you know Daniel used to brag about your art back then? But not in a good way. My stomach tightened. What do you mean? I asked. She hesitated. He used to say things like, she thinks she's gonna be famous, but she'll come crawling back when reality hits. He even showed some of your sketches around once and laughed. I felt the air leave my chest. All this time, while I was painting through heartbreak, through hunger, he wasn't just indifferent. He was mocking me. I thanked Layla and closed the chat. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every word of his new apology played back in my head, now coated with old poison. The next time he called, I picked up, but my voice was calm, measured. He said, hey, I got 2 tickets to that new art expo. Thought maybe we could go together. You'd love it. Daniel, I said slowly, did you ever show my sketches to people back when we were together? There was a pause, too long. What? No. Why would I? I cut him off. Because someone told me you did. That you laughed at me. Silence again. Then a nervous chuckle. Come on, Maya. You know how people talk. Maybe I said stupid stuff back then. I didn't mean anything by it. But you did, I said quietly. You meant every word. He sighed. You're not still holding on to that, are you? People grow up. I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. Yes, they do. Over the next few days, something inside me shifted. The softness I'd allowed him came apart, piece by piece. I started paying attention, digging deeper. Old emails. Messages. Contacts. And that's when I found something, a string of messages between Daniel and a local blogger from years ago, back when I had just started showing my art online. The messages were cruel, mocking my work, calling it pitiful and desperate. One even included screenshots of my early posts. And the sender's name? Daniel H. My Daniel. The man now sitting front row at my gallery shows, clapping the loudest. My hands shook as I scrolled. He hadn't just left me. He'd tried to humiliate me. And now he was here again, smiling like none of it happened, like I owed him forgiveness. That night, I decided I wouldn't just confront him. I'd make sure he understood, deeply, what it meant to underestimate someone who learned to rise alone. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there, staring at the laptop screen, at those messages where Daniel's words danced like ghosts from a time I thought I'd buried. Each line was like a slap from the past. She really thinks she'll be someone. Art doesn't feed you. She'll crawl back once rent hits. She's obsessed with pain. It's pathetic. There it was. My humiliation, captured in black and white, a reminder that even when I was at my most fragile, he'd chosen to make a mockery of me. I felt the ache deep in my chest, not rage, not sadness, something quieter, sharper. A cold, controlled anger that hummed like electricity under the skin. For years, I'd blamed myself for not being enough. For being too emotional, too idealistic. But seeing those messages, it was like the truth finally stood up and stared me in the face. He didn't leave because I was too much. He left because he was too small. The next morning, I went through my old art files. I looked at every piece I'd painted since the day he walked out. Every brushstroke was a scar that had healed into color. Every frame a chapter of survival. And I realized, he wasn't just part of my story. He was the shadow that made the light matter. That thought gave me strength. Still, I needed to be sure. I wanted to hear it from him. So I did something deliberate, something I knew would draw him out. I posted a teaser for my upcoming solo exhibition, Resilience, The Women Who Stayed Standing. The caption read, "Dedicated to those who were told they'd never make it." Within minutes, his message popped up. "That sounds powerful. You always knew how to make people feel something. Can I come to the opening?" I smiled at my screen. "Of course, Daniel," I replied. Because that's exactly where I wanted him. The night of the exhibition arrived. The air was buzzing, camera flashes, murmured conversations, glasses clinking. The walls were filled with my work, women in motion, breaking free from invisible chains, faces half-lit in gold and shadow. And then I saw him. Daniel. He looked nervous but dressed like he'd tried, slicked hair, a blazer that didn't quite fit right. He carried that same smirk, though softer this time, practiced. He walked up to me slowly, holding a bouquet of lilies, white, of course. His favorite cliché. "Maya," he said. "You look incredible." "Thank you," I said, accepting the flowers but setting them aside. "I'm glad you could come. I wouldn't miss it for the world." He looked around the room, eyes scanning the paintings like a man searching for a reflection of himself. "Your work," he said, "it's different now. Powerful. Confident." "It had to be," I replied. "Confidence is a language I had to learn the hard way." He smiled, pretending to understand. "I always knew you'd get here." I turned to face him fully, meeting his gaze. "Did you?" He hesitated. "Of course." I took out my phone, opened the screenshots, and held the screen toward him. "Then why did you say this?" His expression froze. His eyes darted to the messages, his own words staring back at him. He blinked. "Where did you get that?" "It doesn't matter," I said softly. "You wrote it. You tried to humiliate me. You laughed at me when I was barely holding on. People were milling around us, unaware. A few looked our way, sensing tension." He stammered, "Maya, that was years ago. I was stupid." "No," I cut him off, keeping my voice calm. "You were cruel. There's a difference." His face tightened. "You're not really gonna hold that against me forever, are you?" "I've changed." "Changed?" I tilted my head. "Or just desperate now that I don't need you?" The words hit him like glass. He flinched, eyes flashing with something, anger, shame, maybe both. "Maya," he said, lowering his voice, "I came here to make peace. You don't have to do this." I smiled faintly. "Peace doesn't come from pretending the fire never happened, Daniel. It comes from knowing you survived it." The air between us grew still. He looked around the room again, at the people, the lights, the art that carried pieces of him buried under paint and pain. "I just wanted to be part of your life again," he said finally. "I miss what we had." I studied him quietly. "What we had," I said, "was built on me believing I was less than I am. That's not love, Daniel. That's control." He didn't speak. For a moment, I almost felt pity. The man who once laughed at me now stood surrounded by the proof of what I'd become, not despite him, but because of him. And that's when something inside me softened, not for him, but for myself. Because forgiveness, I realized, isn't for the other person, it's the final brushstroke you give to your own healing. Still, I wasn't done yet. Later that evening, during my short speech for the audience, I saw him standing near the back, arms folded, trying to look composed. I took the mic, smiled at the crowd, and said, "This collection is personal. It's about the moments when belief is tested, when someone tells you your dream doesn't matter. When they laugh at you, abandon you, make you question your own worth. But the thing about fire," I continued, "is that it only destroys what was never meant to last." The audience clapped. But my eyes stayed on Daniel. He didn't clap. He just looked at me, face pale, mouth tight, and I knew he understood. Every word was for him. He left before the night ended. When I got home, I found one last message from him. "You didn't have to humiliate me like that." I typed back. "I didn't. I just told the truth." And then, after a long pause, I blocked his number. I sat by the window that night, city lights spilling through the glass, and felt something I hadn't felt in years, quiet peace. Because this time I wasn't the girl painting in the corner, waiting for approval. I was the woman who learned to make beauty out of betrayal. In the weeks that followed, the air around me felt lighter, like the ghosts that once haunted my studio had finally grown tired and left. But peace never comes without echoes. Daniel's words, the new ones, not the old, kept replaying in my mind. "You didn't have to humiliate me." I wondered if that's what I'd done. I hadn't called him names, hadn't shouted, hadn't even mentioned his name. But maybe truth itself feels like humiliation to those who never faced it before. For a moment, I almost felt guilty. Almost. Then I thought about all those nights I cried quietly while he mocked the dreams I held like fragile glass. And the guilt faded. Still, something in me needed closure, not the kind that comes from blocking a number, but from understanding why people destroy what they fear. So, I reached out, not to him, but to her. Lisa. I still had her contact from years ago, though I'd never used it. The message I sent was short. "Hi, Lisa. It's Maya. I'd like to talk, not about him, about the truth." She responded a few hours later. "I didn't think I'd ever hear from you." "Sure. Coffee?" We met at a quiet cafe on the edge of downtown. She looked different, older, yes, but also softer, calmer. There was a weariness in her eyes I recognized instantly. When she saw me, she smiled nervously. "You look amazing, Maya. I've seen your work everywhere." "Thank you," I said, sitting down. I didn't call to talk about that. I just wanted to understand. She looked down at her cup. "Understand what?" "Why he left the way he did. What he told you about me." She hesitated. Then she sighed. "He told me you were controlling. That you thought you were better than him. That you refused to work and expected him to take care of everything." I nodded slowly. "And you believed him?" "I did," she said, voice small. "But it didn't take long to see what he really was. He always had to feel superior. If someone around him started to shine, he'd do whatever it took to dim their light." Her eyes lifted to mine. "He used to talk about you a lot, you know. Even when we were together. Always comparing, always justifying why it didn't work. I think losing you, watching you become who you are, is the one thing he can't stand." Her words were quiet, but they hit hard. Because that's what it was, insecurity dressed as criticism. He hadn't wanted to destroy me. He'd wanted to shrink me down to his comfort level. I smiled sadly. "Thank you, Lisa. That's all I needed to know." As I got up to leave, she reached out. "For what it's worth," she said softly, "I'm sorry I believed his version of you." I nodded. We all believe what we want to until the truth paints itself clear. That night, I went home and opened a new canvas. The first stroke was sharp, crimson cutting across white. Then another, until a shape began to form. A woman standing in a storm, hair wild, eyes open, but she wasn't angry. She was awake. That painting became the centerpiece of my next exhibition. I titled it After the Fire. And this time I didn't dedicate it to those who doubted me. I dedicated it to those who tried to break me, and taught me how to build instead. A few weeks later, a local magazine did a feature on me, from rejection to resilience. They asked if there was anyone who inspired my growth. I smiled and told them the truth. Pain was my first teacher. Betrayal was my second. But healing was the one that made me an artist. The interview went viral. People shared it everywhere, quoting lines, tagging me, thanking me for being real. And somewhere in the mix of all that noise, Daniel reached out again. Not directly, this time, through an email sent to my management account. It was short. No anger, no manipulation, just a quiet plea. I saw your interview. I'm happy for you. I wish I'd believed in you then. I wish I'd been different. I'm sorry. I read it twice. 3 times. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I just felt nothing. Because forgiveness, I realized, doesn't always come with reconciliation. Sometimes it's just a door quietly closing in your mind, with peace on the other side. I didn't reply. But I didn't delete it either. It stayed there, like a reminder that some chapters aren't meant to be rewritten. 1 month later, I was invited to give a talk at a women's empowerment event. The theme was defying doubt. I stood on stage in front of 100 faces, some eager, some uncertain, some clearly nursing their own invisible wounds. And I told them the truth. I told them about the small apartment with peeling walls. About the man who laughed at my dreams. About how failure is never final, it's just a test of how badly you want to rise. And then I said, when people abandon you, don't chase them. Let them go. Because sometimes, their absence is the very space your destiny needs to grow. The audience went silent. Some nodded. Some cried. And in that silence, I felt something sacred, not applause, not validation, but understanding. I ended my talk with one last line. Success isn't revenge. It's peace. And peace comes when you stop proving and start becoming. After the event, a young woman approached me, maybe 23, nervous, holding a small notebook. She said, "Your story, it sounds a lot like mine. My boyfriend tells me my writing's a waste of time. That I'll never make it." I looked at her, saw a younger version of myself standing there, trembling between hope and fear. I told her, "Then write anyway. Let his doubt be your canvas." She smiled through tears, whispering, "Thank you." And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't before. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to every woman who'd ever been told she wasn't enough, and decided to rise anyway. That night, I went home, poured myself a glass of wine, and stood before the painting from my latest show. The woman in the storm looked back at me, fierce and free. And I whispered, "We did it." For the first time, I didn't mean me and him. I meant me and the woman I became after him. The next morning, my phone buzzed nonstop. At first, I thought it was just more social media engagement, until I opened one of the messages. It was from a mutual friend I hadn't spoken to in years. "Hey, have you seen Daniel's post?" I frowned. "What post?" She sent the link. When I opened it, I almost didn't recognize the man on screen. His face was tired, his tone slower, more reflective than I'd ever heard. The caption read, "Sometimes you don't realize who you broke until you see who they became without you." And in the video, he spoke directly to the camera. I used to think love was control. That leadership meant being louder, being right, being obeyed. But then I watched someone I once belittled become everything I secretly wanted to be: brave, creative, unstoppable. If you're watching this, Maya, I know I don't deserve to say your name. But I'm sorry. You didn't deserve the version of me you got. My chest tightened. Not out of pain, but out of something quieter. Closure, maybe. He went on. To anyone watching this, if you have someone in your life who dreams bigger than you can handle, don't clip their wings. Because one day, they'll fly, and you'll be the story they paint in shadows. The comments below were flooded with people calling it powerful, raw, unexpected. Others tagged me, of course, hundreds of them. But I didn't comment. Didn't react. Didn't repost. Because that story was his now, and I was finally free from it. A few days later, my art show, After the Fire, opened to the public. It was the biggest turnout of my life. The room glowed in soft amber light, filled with laughter, conversation, and a quiet reverence that only art born from pain can command. In the center stood the painting that had started it all, The Woman in the Storm. Next to it, I'd placed a small placard with one simple inscription. Sometimes you have to lose everything, to find your voice. A woman in her 50s approached me, tears in her eyes. She said, "Your work feels like healing in color. My daughter went through something like this. She needed to see this tonight." I smiled. Then that's what it's for. Because that's what art is, not decoration, but resurrection. Later that evening, as I mingled through the crowd, someone tapped my shoulder. I turned, and for a heartbeat, time slowed. It was Daniel. He stood there awkwardly, hands in his pockets, eyes searching mine like a man approaching a ghost. "I didn't think you'd come," I said. "I almost didn't," he admitted. "But I needed to see it, to see what I threw away." There was no bitterness in his tone, only honesty. He looked around at the walls lined with my paintings. "You always had this in you. I just didn't know how to handle it." I nodded. "You didn't have to handle it. You just had to believe in it." He exhaled softly. "Yeah. I see that now." For a long second, we stood there, not as enemies, not as lovers, just as two people who'd finally stopped pretending. Then I said, "I hope you find peace, Daniel. Real peace." He smiled faintly. "I think I'm starting to." And then, without a single dramatic word, he walked away. Just like that, the past exited the room. Later that night, after everyone had left and the gallery lights dimmed, I stood alone before my favorite piece. The silence was warm, almost sacred. I realized then that revenge had never been the goal. It wasn't about proving him wrong, it was about proving me right. Because sometimes, the greatest closure isn't confrontation. It's success whispered through the spaces where you were once silenced. The next morning, I woke up to headlines. Local artist's emotional journey inspires thousands. Maya Rivera, turning betrayal into beauty. A story of rebirth, from heartbreak to healing. My inbox flooded with invitations, galleries, interviews, even book offers. But the one message that stood out came from a school teacher. She wrote, "Your story gave my students hope. They're learning that failure isn't the end, it's the beginning." And for the first time, I cried. Not from pain, but from gratitude. Because my art had stopped being a mirror of my suffering, it had become a bridge to someone else's healing. Months passed. The noise faded. But peace stayed. Sometimes I'd get messages from women telling me how they left a toxic partner after watching my talk. Sometimes from men who said they finally saw their own mistakes reflected in Daniel's confession video. That's when I realized something profound. Redemption doesn't always belong to the one who hurt you. Sometimes, it belongs to both of you, in different ways. He found his redemption through guilt. I found mine through growth. One night, as rain drummed softly against my window, I opened my journal and wrote. I used to think love was about holding on. Now I know, real love is what you find when you finally let go. I closed the notebook, exhaled, and smiled. The storm had passed. And I was still standing. But more than that, I was shining. Sometimes, life doesn't give you closure, it gives you clarity. And clarity, I've learned, is the kind of peace that doesn't need anyone's apology to exist. For a long time, I thought I was broken because he left. But now I see, he didn't leave because I wasn't enough. He left because I was too much for a man who didn't want to grow. It's strange, isn't it? The same voice that once said, "You'll never make it," becomes the echo that fuels your rise. The same pain that once tore you apart becomes the reason people feel seen through your art. Life has a cruel, beautiful way of turning pain into purpose, if you let it. And maybe that's what healing really is. Not erasing the past, but learning to frame it differently. Sometimes I think about the version of me that stayed. The one who kept waiting for love to look like validation. The one who thought her softness was weakness, her dreams were burdens, her silence was survival. I want to tell her now. You were never too emotional, you were just surrounded by people who feared emotion. You were never too ambitious, you were just with someone who preferred control over connection. And most of all, you were never hard to love, they just didn't know how to love someone that real. Now, when people ask me what my art means, I tell them this. Every brushstroke is a wound that learned how to speak. Every color is a memory that refused to fade. And every painting, every single one, is proof that beauty can be born from ruins. Because that's what I am now. Not the ashes he left behind, but the fire that grew from them. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear his voice in my head, not mocking, not cruel, just a faint whisper from another lifetime. And instead of anger, I feel gratitude. Because if he hadn't tried to break me, I might never have built myself. One day, I found the first painting I ever made after he left, the one I almost threw away. The lines were messy, the colors harsh, but the emotion, it was real. I kept it. Not as a reminder of pain, but as proof of how far I'd come. I hung it in my studio beside my newest work. Two versions of me, one broken, one blooming, staring at each other. And for the first time, they both smiled. They say revenge is sweet. But peace? Peace is sacred. Revenge screams, look at me. Peace whispers, I don't need you to. And that's the kind of power no one can take away from you, not even the ones who tried to. So here's what I've learned, maybe the only truth that matters. The people who try to destroy you are never stronger than the reason you were built. Pain is not punishment. It's preparation. And sometimes, losing someone isn't the tragedy you think it is, it's the universe clearing space for who you were always meant to become. When I look at my life now, the art, the light, the calm, I don't see what I lost. I see what I gained. I see a woman who learned to love herself loud enough to drown out doubt. Who stopped waiting for permission. Who turned her scars into stories, and her stories into strength. And if you're listening right now, sitting in your own kind of silence, wondering if you'll ever heal, I want you to know. You will. You'll outgrow the version of yourself that begged for love. You'll walk through the fire that was meant to end you, and realize it forged you instead. You'll wake up one day, look in the mirror, and finally recognize yourself, not as a victim, but as the woman who rose. Because healing isn't loud. It's quiet. It's sitting alone, realizing you don't miss them anymore. It's creating something beautiful out of something that once broke you. It's forgiveness without access. Closure without conversation. Peace without proof. And maybe one day, they'll see your name somewhere, on a painting, on a headline, on a story someone else tells. And they'll remember who you were before they underestimated you. And maybe, for just a moment, they'll whisper. She really made it. But by then, you won't even need to hear it. Because you'll already know. This was my story. A story of loss that became light. Of love that became lesson. And of a woman who learned that her greatest masterpiece was herself.